The Illustrious was the lead ship of her class of fleet carriers built for the Royal Navy, and these ships had heavy anti-aircraft armament and an armored deck. This forced the carriers to have smaller hangar decks in height. Because of random storm weather in the Atlantic, the carriers couldn't use the flight deck to store aircraft, as they could get damaged and blown off the deck, but in later operations in the Pacific, the ships had aircraft on the flight deck regardless. The size of their hangars was 82% the size of the American Yorktown-class carriers, but the Americans used the deck to store around 30% of their aircraft. Indomitable was a bit different in her class, as she had 2 hangars and could carry 48 aircraft compared to 36 of her sisters, but this modification made the armored deck thinner. The restrictions of the Second London Naval Treaty kept the ships at maximum displacement of 23,000 tons. The Illustrious class was designed to operate in European waters, so no matter what air group you had on board, the ships would have to fight off larger amounts of land-based aircraft, which also carried bigger bombs. 4 ships made up the Illustrious class. Names were Illustrious, Formidable, Victorious, and Indomitable. As mentioned before, their standard displacement was at 23,000 tons. Overall length was at 740 feet or 225.6 meters, beam at 95 feet 9 inches or 29.2 meters, deep load draft at 28 feet 10 inches or 8.8 meters. 6 Admiralty 3 drum boilers generated 111,000 shaft horsepower. 3 shafts connected to 3 geared steam turbines gave the ships the speed of 30.5 knots. Armament consisted of 8 twin 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns and 6 octuple 40mm pom-poms. All of these ships, with the exception of Indomitable, carried 36 aircraft in hangars, and Indomitable herself carried 48 aircraft. 2 elevators were placed and the island was on the starboard side. Hangars were enclosed. Illustrious and Formidable were commissioned in 1940, and Victorious and Indomitable were commissioned in 1941. Illustrious spent her first half of the war in the Mediterranean, where she launched the raid on Toronto, escorted convoys, and attacked Italian positions. In one battle, she was attacked by Ju-87 Stukas and was heavily damaged by 6 heavy bombs, but managed to get to port for repairs. She spent some time in the Indian Ocean before heading back to support Allied landings in Italy. Illustrious was then sent back to the Pacific for operations against the Japanese until the end of the war. Formidable started the war in the Atlantic and replaced Illustrious in the Mediterranean, where her aircraft damaged and sank the Italian heavy cruiser Pola in the Battle of Cape Matapan. She then covered the evacuation of Greece and attacked shore targets, but was hit by multiple bombs and sent back for repairs. She returned to action and supported the Allied landings in Operation Torch, and then the assault on Sicily, followed by attacks on Tirpitz. Then she sailed to the Pacific until the end of the war. Victoria saw her first action launching an airstrike on the Bismarck. She then took part in escorting convoys in the Arctic, followed by a large convoy to Malta in Operation Torch. As the Saratoga became the only operational carrier in the Pacific in the end of 1942, the carrier joined the Americans as a lone. Once the new American carriers joined the Pacific, Victorious returned to the Atlantic for strikes on the Tirpitz. Then she joined the British Pacific Fleet, conducting operations against Japan until the end of the war. The Indomitable started her career in the Indian Ocean to defend Singapore, just like Force Z. Her fighters weren't available to defend the Prince of Wales and Repulse, and these 2 ships sank after Japanese air attacks. After other operations against the Japanese, she was sent for the same large convoy to Malta as her sister ship Victorious. Then she arrived in the Pacific, where she would stay until the end of the war. After the war, due to the lack of finances, the carriers Formidable, Illustrious, and Indomitable got decommissioned and scrapped. The Victorious got heavily modified, her most noticeable difference being the angled flight deck. But the carrier was scrapped in 1968 due to political decisions to phase out large carriers from the Royal Navy.